In a world where luxury, power, and family expectations dictate the rules, Maria Clara lives surrounded by everything money can offer, yet still feels a deep emptiness. Her seemingly perfect life is completely transformed when she meets Gabriel, the new bodyguard of her family. He, a reserved man of few words, has the mission to protect her, but as fate brings them together, an unexpected bond begins to form between them. This is a story of love, discoveries, and difficult choices, where the barriers between duty and desire will be challenged at every step. What happens when two people from such different worlds fall in love, defying the very rules they created for themselves? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Maria Clara had always been surrounded by everything money could buy. The only child of one of the richest men in the country, she had everything she wanted, but never found satisfaction in material things. Despite the ostentation, the lavish parties, and the expensive gifts, there was a void that even the golden sparkle of the most expensive jewelry couldn't fill. But this emptiness wasn't something she could explain. In fact, she didn't even know what she was looking for. It was on a rainy night, during a gala event at her family's mansion, that fate decided to intertwine her path with Gabriel's. She first saw him from a distance, standing at the security room door. Tall, with an imposing posture, he seemed to be in his own world, silently observing everything around him. Gabriel was the family's new bodyguard, a man of few smiles, but one whose confidence radiated, making anyone feel safe in his presence. Maria Clara watched him from afar. He wasn't there to impress with words or gestures. His gaze was firm, devoid of arrogance, but full of mystery. Something about his presence created a strange feeling in her, both discomfort and attraction. Amidst the glitzy, shallow partygoers, he seemed like a beacon of seriousness. She decided to approach, her charming smile playing on her lips, a hint of provocation in her eyes. "You look like a fish out of water here, don't you think?" she said, slowly walking toward him. Gabriel looked at her with a touch of surprise, but his serious demeanor remained unchanged. He replied with a deep yet gentle voice, "I'm not much of a fan of parties. I prefer a quiet place, where people genuinely care about each other." Maria Clara was intrigued. He wasn't like the others around her, but what caught her attention the most was how he was completely immune to her charm. It made her want to know more. The following days were filled with routine luxury, yet Maria Clara couldn't stop thinking about Gabriel. There was something different about him that she couldn't quite grasp. It wasn't just his silence or the mystery in his eyes. It was the way he made her feel, like a puzzle, one that was too complex for her usual charm to solve. One afternoon, after another extravagant event at her father's mansion, Maria Clara decided to find him. She had to understand why he intrigued her so much. He wasn't like any of the other men she had encountered. Most of them were drawn to her wealth and beauty, but Gabriel, he was different. She found him outside, standing near the mansion's grand gardens, his figure silhouetted against the golden sunset. He was staring off into the distance, seemingly lost in thought. The moment she stepped closer, he turned his head slightly, acknowledging her presence without a word. Maria Clara, despite the usual confidence she carried, felt an unusual nervousness ripple through her. She had never had to chase someone before. "Are you always this quiet?" she asked, leaning against one of the garden's marble pillars. Her tone was playful, but there was an edge of curiosity beneath it. Gabriel glanced at her, and for the first time, Maria Clara saw a flicker of something, perhaps vulnerability, or maybe it was just a fleeting thought he was trying to hide. "I'm not here to entertain you, Miss Clara," he said simply, his voice calm but firm. She smirked, unfazed. "That's funny, because I was beginning to think you were here to protect me." "I'm here to do my job," Gabriel replied, his expression never wavering. But there was something else in his gaze now, something softer, a quiet understanding. The air between them was thick with unspoken words. Maria Clara couldn't help but feel the pull of this strange connection. It wasn't just about protection. There was a tension, something electric lingering between them, and for the first time she wanted more than just a superficial conversation. Days turned into weeks, and Maria Clara found herself drawn to Gabriel more than she ever expected. Every encounter left her with a strange sense of longing. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but something was shifting inside her. Her feelings were no longer just curiosity. They were deeper, more complicated, and even unsettling. She noticed his absence more now. When he wasn't around, the house seemed emptier, and she found herself glancing at the security room door, hoping to catch a glimpse of him. And though she tried to convince herself it was just because he was her father's new employee, she knew it was more than that. She was captivated. One evening, while at one of her father's business dinners, Maria Clara felt restless. The event was once again filled with high society, businessmen, investors, and the usual crowd of socialites, but she had no interest in the discussions. Her eyes scanned the room for him. As if reading her thoughts, Gabriel appeared at the entrance of the ballroom, his presence commanding attention, even in a room full of influential people. He stood at the back of the room, observing everyone with quiet precision, his gaze occasionally shifting to Maria Clara. The brief eye contact was enough to send a rush of warmth through her body. After a while, unable to ignore the attraction anymore, Maria Clara excused herself from the table. She walked across the room, her heels clicking against the marble floor, and found herself standing next to Gabriel, who still hadn't moved from his spot. "I thought you might be avoiding me," she said, her voice teasing, though her heart was racing. "I don't avoid anyone, Miss Clara," he responded, his voice steady and calm. "I just don't get involved in distractions." Her breath caught in her throat. There was something in his words, an unspoken warning, but instead of feeling pushed away, she only wanted to get closer. "You're wrong," she replied, her eyes meeting his with more intensity. "I think you're just afraid of what might happen if you get involved." Gabriel's jaw tightened slightly, his eyes flickering with emotion that he quickly masked. "I don't do involved," he said firmly, his voice dropping lower. "Not with someone like you." Maria Clara felt a spark of defiance rise within her. "And why is that?" He didn't answer, but his silence was more telling than any words could have been. Maria Clara took a step back, realizing that the distance between them wasn't just physical. It was emotional, and it was something neither of them could ignore. It was only after a few more awkward encounters that Maria Clara realized the complexity of her feelings. Every time she saw Gabriel, something inside her shifted, a mix of frustration and longing building within her. She had always been in control of every situation, used to getting what she wanted without much effort. But Gabriel was a challenge, and that made him the most intriguing puzzle she had ever faced. Her world, which had always been filled with shallow admirers and superficial relationships, felt like it was becoming more and more suffocating. It was as though Gabriel's very presence was slowly breaking down the walls she had carefully built around herself. Every glance, every word between them felt like a slow unraveling, but she wouldn't let herself fall for someone like him. One evening, as Maria Clara sat by the grand fireplace in the living room, nursing a glass of wine, she felt a presence in the doorway. She looked up, expecting to see one of the usual guests, but it was Gabriel. He stepped inside quietly, his usual stoic expression on his face, but his eyes seemed a little less guarded than usual. "Miss Clara," he began, his deep voice resonating in the quiet room. "There's been an incident. Your father has requested I accompany you home tonight after the event." Maria Clara didn't need to ask what kind of incident it was. She could see the tension in his posture and the way his hands clenched at his sides. There was always something lurking beneath the surface with him, and this was no different. She felt an odd mix of frustration and something else, something she didn't want to acknowledge. "I don't need your protection," she replied coolly, her voice tinged with defiance. She had always prided herself on being independent. The thought of needing anyone, especially someone like him, made her uncomfortable. He stepped closer, his expression softening slightly but still firm. "It's not about need, Miss Clara. It's about your safety." Maria Clara stood up, the tension between them palpable. She walked towards him, but the closer she got, the more she felt the pull of their connection. "You don't know anything about me, Gabriel," she said quietly, her voice wavering for just a second. He didn't respond immediately, but she saw something in his eyes shift, something more vulnerable, less guarded. It was as if he was fighting with himself, caught between duty and something more personal. But before she could say anything more, he turned, his tone back to its usual calm but unwavering demeanor. "I'll wait for you outside." Maria Clara watched him leave the room, her heart racing for reasons she didn't want to admit. The line between them, once so clearly defined, was now blurry, and she was dangerously close to crossing it. The next few days passed in a haze. Maria Clara tried to push her growing feelings for Gabriel out of her mind, but every time they crossed paths, it became increasingly impossible to ignore the chemistry between them. She had always prided herself on being able to control her emotions, but with him, it was as though every defense she had built over the years was crumbling, piece by piece. One late afternoon, after another tedious business dinner at her father's mansion, Maria Clara found herself alone in the library, flipping through old books. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that only added to her loneliness. She didn't want to feel this way, she didn't want to need anyone, but the truth was she couldn't stop thinking about Gabriel. His presence lingered in her thoughts, uninvited yet undeniable. Suddenly the door creaked open, and there he was again. Gabriel stood in the doorway, his usual serious demeanor softened by the shadows in the room. He hadn't spoken yet, but the air between them felt thick with unspoken words. "I didn't expect to find you here," she said, her voice quieter than usual. Her gaze flickered over to the window, avoiding his eyes for fear of giving away the truth. "I thought you might be here," Gabriel replied, stepping into the room, his eyes never leaving hers. The way he looked at her, with a mix of guarded intensity and curiosity, made her heart race. She stood up abruptly, the sharp sound of the chair scraping against the floor cutting through the tension. "What do you want, Gabriel?" she asked, her tone laced with a mix of frustration and longing. "I want you to be safe," he said, his voice steady, but there was something more behind it, something raw, something unspoken. Maria Clara walked toward him, her steps slow but deliberate. There was something about his calm, unwavering presence that both frustrated and fascinated her. She stopped just a few inches from him, her breath catching in her throat. "I'm not a child," she whispered, her words trembling slightly. "I don't need you to protect me." Gabriel didn't move, his eyes locked on hers, searching for something, and then without warning he reached out, his hand brushing the side of her face, his touch gentle yet electrifying. The contact sent a wave of heat through her body, and for the first time she felt vulnerable, completely exposed. Before she could react, he stepped back, his expression hardening once more. "I shouldn't be doing this," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. He turned toward the door, his back to her, but his voice carried over his shoulder. "I'll see you tomorrow, Miss Clara." As he walked away, Maria Clara stood frozen in the middle of the room, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew that what had just happened was a crossing of lines, lines that both of them had kept in place for far too long. But now, those lines were no longer so clear, and she couldn't help but wonder, what would happen if they both crossed them? The next few days felt like a slow, inevitable descent into a place neither of them was ready to go. Maria Clara tried to act normal, but everything felt different now. She saw Gabriel everywhere, his figure lurking at the edge of her thoughts, his presence haunting every corner of the mansion. She knew he was always around, watching her, ensuring her safety, but it was becoming harder to see him as just a protector. That evening, as another lavish event unfolded in the mansion, Maria Clara found herself feeling restless. The room was filled with laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the hum of meaningless conversations, but it felt like a suffocating haze around her. She scanned the crowd for Gabriel, and when she saw him standing near the far corner, away from the bustle, her heart skipped a beat. Without thinking, she made her way through the crowd, her steps quick but deliberate. The closer she got to him, the more the noise of the party faded into the background, until all that remained was the pull she felt toward him, uncontrollable, undeniable. When she finally reached him, she stopped just short of standing right in front of him, her breath uneven. Gabriel's eyes softened slightly, but he didn't say anything. He simply watched her, as though waiting for her to speak. "Why do you keep doing this?" Maria Clara's voice cracked as she asked the question she'd been holding in for days. "Why do you keep pushing me away when I know you feel the same way?" Gabriel's jaw tightened. For a moment, he didn't answer. He stared at her, as though searching for the right words to say. But Maria Clara didn't need him to explain. She knew. "I'm here because I want to keep you safe," he said finally, his voice low and measured. "But that doesn't mean I can allow myself to feel anything for you. It's not part of my job." Maria Clara's eyes flickered with a mixture of disbelief and frustration. "Your job? You're more than just my bodyguard, Gabriel. You're not a machine. You're not some hired help who can't have feelings." The tension between them was so thick that it felt like the very air was charged with electricity. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. And then, without warning, Maria Clara stepped closer to him, closing the gap that had always existed between them. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it was filled with desperation. "I don't want you to be my bodyguard. I want you to be more than that." Gabriel's gaze darkened and he stepped back, his hand almost instinctively rising to his chest. "You don't understand. I can't be more than that. I have to keep you safe. That's all I can offer." But Maria Clara wasn't listening anymore. She stepped forward once again, this time with determination in her eyes. "I don't need you to protect me anymore, Gabriel. I need you to choose me." In that moment, time seemed to slow. Gabriel looked down at her, the turmoil in his eyes as deep as the sea. And for the first time, she saw something shift inside him. It was a fleeting moment, a crack in the armor he'd built around himself, but just as quickly as it came, it was gone. Gabriel stepped away, his back to her. "I can't," he said quietly, his voice strained. "I'm sorry." Maria Clara stood there, her heart racing, the weight of his words sinking into her chest. The line that had once been so clear between them was now shattered, and in that moment, she realized that they were both standing at the edge of something neither of them was ready to face. The following days were a blur for Maria Clara. She tried to go about her life, attending her usual social events, mingling with the rich and influential, but nothing felt the same. The weight of Gabriel's rejection had settled deep within her, and no matter how much she tried to mask it, her heart ached with every passing moment. Despite everything, she couldn't let go of the truth. She needed him. She had spent so much of her life chasing after things she didn't truly want, only to find that the one thing she craved, the one thing that truly mattered, was standing right in front of her. But Gabriel, he was a man bound by duty, a man who had built walls around his emotions that nothing, not even her, could break. That evening she couldn't take it anymore. The endless social events, the meaningless conversations, it all felt so hollow. Maria Clara excused herself from another extravagant gala, stepping out into the cool night air. She walked through the grand estate's gardens, the weight of her emotions pulling her deeper into the solitude she often sought. Then, as if summoned by the very depth of her yearning, she saw him. Gabriel stood by the garden's fountain, his back to her, his broad shoulders rigid in the night. It was the same spot where they had first spoken outside the gala weeks ago, the same place where she had felt the pull of something stronger than herself. The air was thick with unspoken words, with everything they hadn't said to each other. Maria Clara's breath caught in her throat as she stepped closer, every step measured and deliberate. The moonlight illuminated her face, casting soft shadows on her features, but it did little to hide the uncertainty and pain in her eyes. She didn't speak immediately, letting the silence stretch between them. Finally, Gabriel turned, his eyes meeting hers. There was something different in his gaze this time, something soft, almost vulnerable. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said quietly, his usual authoritative tone now laced with concern. Maria Clara smiled faintly, a sad smile. "I needed to be alone," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But now that you're here, I think I need to talk to you." Gabriel took a step forward, his face conflicted. "I told you before, Maria Clara, I'm not the right man for you." Her heart pounded in her chest. "But you are," she said, her voice steady, full of determination. "You are the right man for me, Gabriel. If you would just let yourself be." The words hung in the air like a challenge, like a plea. Gabriel closed his eyes briefly, as if to gather his thoughts, to find the strength to keep his walls intact. But the struggle in his eyes was undeniable. He took a step closer to her, his hand hovering as if uncertain whether to reach out. "I can't just let go of everything, Maria Clara. I can't abandon the rules I've set for myself." "Then let me in," she whispered, stepping closer. "Let me be a part of your world." His hand dropped to his side, and for a long moment, there was only the sound of the night surrounding them. Gabriel's jaw tightened as if he was holding back every emotion he had kept buried for so long. But then, after what seemed like an eternity, he took one final step forward. "I'm not perfect," he said, his voice raw. "I don't know if I can give you everything you deserve, but I can't walk away from you, Maria Clara, not anymore." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them away quickly. She didn't need words anymore. She needed him. And in that moment, Gabriel stepped closer, cupping her face gently in his hands, and kissed her, slowly, tentatively at first, but with a depth of emotion that spoke volumes. It wasn't just a kiss, it was a promise, an unspoken agreement that they were both willing to fight for something they had both tried so hard to avoid. As they pulled apart, Gabriel's forehead rested gently against hers. "You've broken every wall I've ever built, Maria Clara," he murmured. "Then let's build something new," she whispered back. The days following their confession were a whirlwind for Maria Clara and Gabriel. They navigated the newfound territory of their relationship cautiously, each step forward measured, but their connection grew deeper with each passing moment. Gabriel, for the first time, allowed himself to let go of the walls he had so carefully constructed around his heart. And Maria Clara, once caught in the whirlwind of her privileged life, found herself discovering a new world, a world where love wasn't about status or expectation, but about the raw, unfiltered emotions they shared. Maria Clara's father, still unaware of the changes happening within the walls of his home, continued to treat Gabriel as just the bodyguard, a necessary part of the security detail. But for Maria, Clara, and Gabriel, their bond had surpassed the roles they were expected to play. One afternoon, after a long week of tension, Maria Clara invited Gabriel to the garden once again. This time, however, the setting was different. They weren't bound by duty or obligation. They were two people who had chosen each other. The garden, now blooming with spring flowers, symbolized the new chapter they were both beginning. "Do you ever wonder how we got here?" Maria Clara asked, breaking the comfortable silence that had enveloped them as they walked through the garden. Gabriel glanced at her, his lips curling into a faint smile. "Every day," he replied, his voice softer than usual. "But maybe some things are just meant to happen, even when we don't understand them." Maria Clara paused, taking in his words. For the first time in a long while, she felt at peace with herself. She wasn't chasing after some ideal version of her life anymore. She was living it, fully and completely, with the man who had become her everything. "I never thought I'd end up here," she said quietly, looking up at him. "But now I can't imagine being anywhere else." Gabriel's hand brushed lightly against hers, a simple, unspoken gesture of comfort. He turned to her, his expression serious, but his eyes filled with warmth. "We both have scars, Maria Clara. I've spent so much of my life building walls to protect myself. But with you, I think I finally understand that being open, being vulnerable, isn't a weakness. It's a strength." Maria Clara's heart swelled. "Then let's build this together," she whispered, her hand resting gently in his. They stood there for a long moment, their hands intertwined, the weight of their pasts slowly dissolving as they focused on the future. There was no more hiding, no more pretending. They were free to love each other, to embrace their imperfections and everything that came with it. It wasn't an easy road ahead. Maria Clara knew that there would be challenges, her family's expectations, the judgment of those who would never understand their love. But for the first time, she didn't fear them. With Gabriel by her side, she felt invincible. Together, they would face whatever came their way, no longer confined by the roles they had been given, but free to write their own story.